There was no money. There was almost no food. The pantry had 3 things in it and 2 of them were almost gone. But every single day, without fail, without complaint, without ever letting you see how close to empty things actually were, there was dinner. Hot, real, enough. This is how she did it. This is what she made from almost nothing. And why, somehow, it was the best food you ever ate. Number 1. Water tortillas with lard and salt. No broth. No milk. No eggs. Just masa harina, water, a little lard if there was lard, salt. She made them every morning from the same ingredients and the same proportions because the proportions were not a recipe, they were the minimum required to make something that held together on the komil and could be eaten without anything on top if necessary and with whatever existed if something existed. On the mornings when there was nothing else, the tortilla with lard and salt was breakfast and lunch and sometimes dinner. On the mornings when there was 1 egg or a spoonful of beans, the tortilla became a delivery mechanism for something larger than itself. She never presented it as deprivation. She set it on the table warm, folded in the cloth she had been using for 20 years, and let the warmth of it make its own argument. A warm tortilla on a cold morning is not nothing. It is, in fact, a very specific kind of everything. The kind that requires only flour and water and heat and someone who got up before you did to make it. The lard gave it fat and the fat gave it staying power and the staying power got the children to school and the men to the fields and the women through the morning and into the afternoon where the next problem was already waiting to be solved. Number 2. Bean soup with 1 dried chili. 1 chili. Not because that was the recipe, because that was what was left. The dried chili de arbol or the ancho or the pasilla, whichever variety had survived longest in the paper bag she kept in the back of the cabinet, toasted on the dry komil until it softened and darkened and released its smell into the kitchen, then torn into pieces and added to the bean pot. The beans had been soaking since the night before, pinto or black or whatever was cheapest at the market that week. Cooked low and slow in water with a piece of onion and the chili and whatever herb existed, episode if she grew it, cilantro if she didn't. The broth that resulted from hours of this process was not thin. It was deep and brown and tasted like it had more in it than it did, because the chili had done what dried chiles do. Expanded everything around them, made the water taste like it had always been broth, made the beans taste like they had been cooked with meat even when there was no meat and had not been meat for 2 weeks. She knew what the chili could do. She used it the way a painter uses a single strong color, sparingly, precisely, in the place where it would do the most work. Number 3. Egg and potato, the meal that stretched furthest. 2 eggs. 3 potatoes. 1 chili. Enough for 5 people if she was careful, and she was always careful, had been careful so long that careful had stopped feeling like constraint and started feeling like skill, which is what it was. The potatoes boiled first until just soft, then cut into pieces and added to the pan where the chili had already been toasting in a little lard, then the eggs cracked over everything and scrambled in, the heat lowered so the egg cooked slowly through the potato rather than sitting on top of it, becoming something integrated, something where you could not take a bite of just egg or just potato but only the thing they had become together. She served it with tortillas and nothing else and it fed the family and nobody left the table hungry and nobody mentioned that there had only been 2 eggs and nobody mentioned the potatoes. They ate what was in front of them and they were grateful in the way people are grateful when the alternative is visible and close and real. The food tasted good because she had made it taste good from almost nothing, which is a different kind of cooking than making something taste good from abundance. It is harder. It requires more knowledge. It produces, sometimes, better results. Number 4. Corn gruel with piloncillo. The corn masa dissolved in water and cooked until thick, sweetened with whatever sugar existed, piloncillo if there was piloncillo, plain sugar if there wasn't, nothing if there was neither, and the sweetness had to come from the cinnamon she added instead, which gave the impression of sweetness without the cost of it. She made it for breakfast on the coldest mornings and for dinner on the nights when there was nothing else and for the children when they were sick and needed something warm that would not ask anything of a compromised stomach. The consistency she aimed for was between thin and thick. Thin enough to drink, thick enough to feel like a meal, a balance she achieved by adding the masa slowly and stirring continuously and adjusting as she went, never measuring, because measuring implies quantities that can be relied upon and in the depression the quantities could not be relied upon. What could be relied upon was her judgment, her hands, her knowledge of what the mixture looked like at the right moment, her willingness to stand at the stove stirring something that cost almost nothing until it became something worth eating. Number 5. Cactus with chili and lime. The cactus grew wild in places. It grew in yards and along roads and in lots where nothing else had been planted and nobody had thought to tend it. She gathered it herself when she could not afford to buy it, carrying a cloth and a knife, choosing the younger pads that were more tender, avoiding the older ones that had grown thick and fibrous and required more preparation than the younger ones rewarded. At home she cleaned them on the table, the spines removed with the knife in quick practice strokes, the pads sliced thin, blanched in salted water to reduce the slime, drained and cooled and dressed with lime and chili and a little salt. The result was something that tasted bright and slightly tart and deeply green and nothing like what it had cost to make. On a plate next to the bean soup or the egg and potato it looked like abundance. It provided what the rest of the meal didn't: acid, texture, something fresh in a diet that was otherwise heavy and brown and built for survival rather than pleasure. She understood that pleasure matters even when survival is the primary concern. Especially then. A meal without something fresh is a meal that announces its own scarcity. She refused to announce it. Number 6. Bone broth soup with whatever vegetables remained. She kept every bone. This is the rule that Depression-era Mexican kitchens ran on: nothing that could give more was allowed to stop giving. The chicken bones from Sunday went into a pot with water on Monday. The beef bone from the soup 2 weeks ago, cracked to expose the marrow, went in with them. Simmered for hours, skimmed, strained, returned to the pot with whatever vegetables had made it to the end of the week: the carrot that was going soft, the zucchini that had a bruise she cut around, the corn cob stripped of its kernels for another dish, now added whole to the broth for what remained in it. The result smelled like abundance. It tasted like a household that had more than it did. She served it with tortillas and did not call it bone soup. She called it caldo, which is just the Spanish word for broth but which carries within it the history of every woman who had ever stood over a pot of bones and water and willed it into something worth eating. She added that will every time. It was the ingredient that cost nothing and changed everything. Number 7. The last day of the week meal. Friday. The pantry at its emptiest. The money spent or nearly spent. The beans at the bottom of the pot, the masa almost gone, the lard reduced to a film on the inside of the jar. She opened everything and looked at what existed and made a decision that was not really a decision: it was the application of 30 years of knowledge to the specific problem of what to feed 5 people from what remained. Maybe it was a thin soup of the last beans with the last chili and the last of the herb on the windowsill. Maybe it was masa patted into flat rounds and cooked dry on the comal and eaten with the film of lard from the jar. Maybe it was something that had no name because it had never existed before and would never exist again in exactly that form, produced by the specific combination of what was left on that specific Friday and what she knew how to do with it. It tasted good. It always tasted good. Not because the ingredients were good, they were almost gone. But because she was good, because the knowledge in her hands was good, because 30 years of feeding people from the bottom of an empty pantry had made her into something that no culinary school produces and no cookbook contains. She was the technology. She was the resource. She was what stood between her family and hunger, every day, on a budget that should not have been enough, and somehow always was.